Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I thought I'd do something a bit different, and that is just kind of take a look at some of the biggest stories to come out of IEM Cologne, as this is one of the most prestigious events we have in our circuit. It's probably the biggest LAN that we have outside of the two Valve majors, and this was also the first event of the second season of 2025 after the player break and after, some teams have made some roster changes. And so it was interesting to see how some of these teams were going to debut. Could we see some of our strong teams continue to stay strong? Could someone work their way up the totem pole or at least show flashes of potential? There's a lot of question marks going into this one, and we had a lot of big things happen. So I figured I would just kind of do like a very surface level, broad strokes view of some of the biggest things that happened in IEM Cologne. If you enjoy this type of content, let me know. Again, I'm always kind of experimenting with the type of stuff I can do on this channel as I try to be pretty consistent with the content I put out and, dabble in different things I might be able to do. So just let me know. And also, if you don't mind, before we start getting into this, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. We just broke the 4,500 subscriber mark, and we're on our way to 5,000 subscribers, and we've gained so much just in this year alone, as I've really tried to make YouTube a little bit more of a focus in 2025. So I would really appreciate if you'd help me continue to grow that. Leave a like, leave a comment down below. All those things certainly help. Let me know if this is some type of content that you like, or is there other content you would like to see? I was thinking potentially of doing, for example, a really big breakdown of the Mouz Vitality series and really kind of breaking down how did Mouz actually pull off the victory. Let me know if that's something you might be interested in. But without further ado, let's kind of just get into some of the big talking points to come out of this event. So as far as what is the biggest story to come out of this event, in all honesty, it probably would be the whole situation that happened with Vitality and with mousesports in that semifinals match and all the historical context around that matchup. But I thought it was fitting to start with Spirit because they are indeed the winners of the tournament at the end of the day, and that really does mean something. And for Spirit, this is pretty big. I mean, it is awesome to see them win another huge event. Obviously, they won the Shanghai Major to end last year, so they came into this year really looking to be the #1 team in the world. And they were able to come into this year, win the first event at Blast Bounty. Kind of a weird format, to be fair, but they still ultimately did come out on top. They were also able to make the finals at IEM Katowice, but obviously that is what kickstarts the Vitality era and the dominance that they had this season. But they finished top 4 or better at every other event they attended this year. They won a smaller event when it comes to team stature at PGL Astana, and really their only fall was the Blast Austin Major, where they did ultimately finish top 8, getting knocked out in the quarterfinals by mousesports. And we know that the mousesports Spirit rivalry has been an interesting one because they're two top 4 teams in the world. They have both been kind of battling for #2 behind Vitality, in my opinion, with the occasional pop-up of someone like Falcons, who had a stretch there for a few events before Austin where they were certainly putting their name in the hat for, a top 3, top 4 team in the world. Obviously, MongolZ really kind of settled into a top 5 position there in their battle with Aurora for who was going to be 5th in kind of the top 5 as NaVi slipped down. FaZe had their struggles. It really came down to teams like Vitality, like Spirit, like mousesports, like Falcons, MongolZ, so on and so forth, kind of really tangling for a top position. But Spirit show up to this event, and they do get the job done. They were able to quickly dispatch of Heroic in a new look form, as well as taking down Aurora, who were using xCloud as a stand-in for Xantares, to be fair. And then they actually did have a pretty close matchup with mousesports, their first meeting in the tournament. You can see here it was a 3-map series where the first map, Spirit had to win it in overtime. Then Mirage went into multiple overtimes, and mousesports were able to come out on top. But if we're honest, Overpass was a very one-sided affair, as this map just came into the pool for the first time at this tournament. I actually did a pretty deep breakdown on some of the biggest plays from Overpass from the tournament, from the play-in and the group stage, if you want to go check that out, to kind of just get some thoughts on Overpass strategy. So, yeah, ultimately, though, they got the job done. They did win. Obviously, Donk, as always, popping off, carrying. Shiro, again, always being that second star for Spirit. Zontix actually had a pretty decent series this time around as well, though he did struggle in some other series. And ultimately, it was enough to get the job done to move on. Then they also had a relatively close series against NaVi. Here, the first map was 13-11, so close scoreline, but I would say that Spirit were pretty much in the driver's seat of this one. Once they got to the T side, they pretty much dominated. It didn't seem like NaVi were really going to have a chance to come back and get this one. At a certain point, it just felt like Spirit were in firm control, and they were able to get the job done. Then on Nuke, NaVi were able to dominate on their CT side in the first half, and while Spirit had a bit of a comeback on their own defense, NaVi did wind up taking this. Then obviously we saw Spirit dominate them, though, on Ancient. Once again, seeing the 2 stars of the team really shine. Bright, Chopper actually had a decent fragging performance in this series, believe it or not. Zontic's a little bit more off on this one, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Spirit get the job done yet again. And then they face MouseSports again in the grand finals, continuing that rivalry we have been seeing budding over the Cross 2025. And really, when you look at it, I mean, I just kind of will show you, it has been interesting to watch these 2 teams duke it out. This was the 5th series they had played against each other this year since Spinks joined the team. Obviously at EPL, Mouz was able to get the better of them in this best of 3. They were also able to get the better of them at the Blast Open Lisbon. This is where Mouz would really kind of prove themselves to be the number 2 team in the world. They just couldn't get past Vitality. But then the Blast also Major, again, Mouz get the better of them. But Spirit were able to turn the tides in Cologne earlier on in the tournament, and now here in the grand finals, they pretty much dominated, right? I mean, I will say Ancient was close, and Mouz probably should have won Ancient. I mean, when you look at this, they actually at one point were up 11-5 after making a good comeback on the CT side and starting off the T side in good fashion, but then they could not find a way to close this game. So kind of a choke job there for MouseSports, and if they could have won Ancient, we might have had a more interesting series. I mean, Overpass really could have been an interesting toss-up map between these two, as no one has been able to establish themselves on a brand new map to the pool, but ultimately Spirit do dominate, and ultimately, yet again, donk pops off, has an amazing performance. We actually saw Zontic play pretty well in a couple of the games as well. Chopper, again, having kind of another good fragging performance. This is some of the better fragging I've seen out of Chopper in a big tournament for Spirit in quite some time, to be honest with you. And everyone else did what they were supposed to do to get the job done. And so, yeah, Spirit do once again hoist another big trophy. But really, donk is obviously the one really to highlight in this whole situation. I mean, these were donk stats at IEM Cologne, which is just absolutely bonkers when you look through them. I mean, just when you look at the rating, when you look at the ADR, when you look at the KPR, it's just obscene that he is able to put up this level of performance, especially when you consider who he played against. I mean, he played against MouseSports twice, who was the number 2 team in the world, right? And a team that had given them a lot of trouble in the past. So they're playing against elite opposition. He is putting up these numbers. It's not like he's, playing against plumbers or something like that. And yeah, just absolutely bonkers stuff. But the one thing I want to point out that's really crazy about donk is actually his T-side opening. Because at this tournament, he had a near 33% opening attempt rate on the T-side with a near 61% success rate. That is bonkers, guys. Like, no one on T-side entering is getting anywhere near that level of impact and success. Like, it's actually absurd. I think it's actually gotten to the point where donk's been so good for so long, and we've been uttering so much praise about this guy for such an extended period of time now because of what we've been seeing him do over these last couple of years, that I feel like people are almost becoming numb to the fact on how good this guy actually is. Like, we're kind of running out of compliments to give this guy, right? I mean, this is by far the biggest carry we have seen in Counter-Strike history since Prime Simple, and he's doing it in the most difficult role that you possibly could have, which is not only being the star of your team and not only being overly relied upon for your team to be successful, because he is essentially a carry. I mean, yes, Shiro is a decent second star as a passive opper. There's been times where Shiro has proven that he's willing to be a little bit more dynamic as an opper and go for more plays, but he's also kind of cooled back down lately and went back more to the passive style of opping. They tried to bring in Zwei, who was a guy who was supposed to be a guy who could bring in some firepower. He looked pretty good on the Amiga, but this was a very cold start for him at Cologne. It was actually very disappointing, to be honest with you. Zontic seems on and off. Obviously, Chopper's not someone you can rely upon to frag a whole hell of a lot. And so it really does come down a lot of the time to whether or not donk can carry his team to victory. So the fact that he is in that position and he just keeps delivering time and time again. I mean, yeah, sure, you put them against Vitality, it's a lot harder to do because there's just so many good players on Vitality that eventually you are just going to get outmatched on firepower. And I do think that MouseSports, if everybody had showed up on form in the grand final, if they had showed up to the same degree that they had showed up to Vitality in the semifinal, if you could have had Torzy and Zershin, playing at top form, Jimmy in top form, Spinks in top form, like, that is enough firepower to be able to actually go toe-to-toe with the overall firepower firepower of Spirit for sure. But donk is just always going to be the most impactful player on the server, and that is just due to his sheer performance, the role that he is playing, and it's just obscene. And this is not just some one-off, by the way. If you look at the entirety of 2025, I mean, again, the rating is bonkers. The ADR is bonkers. The KPR is bonkers. And then that same thing on the T side, 32% for the year, 58% success rate. Again, there is just hardly anyone even remotely close to this level of success as an entry fragger on the T side. Not to mention that outside of entering, he can also sometimes just kind of play a little bit more into the mid-round and call his own shots on T side. You kind of leave him in some aggro lurk positions, and he can pull those off as well as the pure entering. He obviously plays a lot of star roles on CT side, defends super well. Just an incredible rifler, a talent like of which we have not really seen. I mean, again, I feel like we're kind of getting numb at this point to just how good this guy is, but that will be the end of the Spirit storyline. But now we will get to the Mouse Sports side of the story, because they ultimately did come second place at this tournament, and while they did get dominated by Spirit in the grand finals, they really should have at least won Ancient and pushed it to a fourth map and made things interesting. They had a pretty good event overall, you have to say. I mean, yeah, sure, it started out a bit shaky, you know, having some closer matches against NaVi in these two maps, obviously losing to Spirit. And then even the Furia match, this was very close. Very, very close indeed. I mean, they had the win train in overtime. They wound up losing Mirage. And then this Inferno game, it required them to make a pretty hefty comeback to be able to win this thing. I mean, when you actually look at this match, we'll take a look at it here. I mean, Furia were up 11-7. Kind of reminiscent of the Ancient in the grand finals between Mouse Sports and Spirit, where they definitely had Mouse up against the ropes. They very well could have moved on to the semifinals against Vitality instead of Mouse, but they fell off, unfortunately, and Mouse were able to shine in that 6-round stretch to move on to the semifinals. But of course, the big story will be that of them playing Vitality. And so this is the big one, right? On the 8th time of asking, after losing to Vitality 7 times in a row, most of those maps not even being close. Yes, there were a couple of maps that Mouse were able to win in those 7 different series. There was one best of 5 that they pushed to all 5 maps, for example. You know, they really were unable to get one over on Vitality. No one did. I mean, Vitality won 37 BO3, BO5s in a row offline. One of the greatest streaks we've ever seen, probably the greatest streak we've ever seen in modern Counter-Strike. The only one that even comes close is in IP, but that was way back in 2012, 2013. So, I mean, in a different era of how competitive the scene actually was and what other top teams were available. Not trying to belittle NIP by any means, but what Vitality has done is crazy. We'll talk a little bit about Vitality in a second, but I do want to focus on the Mouse Sports side of this, because, I mean, this really is just incredible that they were able to beat Vitality in such a one-sided fashion. And they did it with a crazy comeback on the Mirage CT side. I mean, they were down 8-4, but then they just ride on the CT side. And if you guys want me to, I'll do a more detailed breakdown of this series because of how important it is to CS's history. But they were just so good at disrupting Vitality on the CT side. I mean, particularly when Vitality early in the half were trying to establish mid control and kind of play some of their defaulty CS into some mid-round, you know, splits or executes. They just stuffed them. They just kept stuffing them with counter utility at middle, aggressive actions at middle. That was allowing them to also get like forward on a ramp in some situations or free up towards these op to get into some prime real estate to be able to find some picks. And they were just completely dominating Vitality in the second half. Like, it wasn't even close. I can't even really put any blame on Vitality. It was simply Mouse Sports dominating them on the CT side, playing such good counters against Vitality's game plan throughout. And then when you get the train, I feel like there was a couple different situations here. Like, I think Vitality were doing okay overall on the T side, but they could have had so much more. I mean, this anti-eco round is one that is going to haunt them when they look at this series. And there was another anti-eco round, I believe, in the second half that they lost that also is going to haunt them. I think it was a 2-on-5 that Mouse won with Deagles. Basically, I think Spinks did pick up an M4 after one of his Deagle kills at Olaf, but they basically 2v5 Vitality with Deagles. So there were a couple of crazy anti-eco situations that happened in this game that you can certainly point to. And again, I'll do a more detailed breakdown of this series if you want to see it. But it's just incredible to see Mouse Sports get the job done after losing to this team repeatedly. And the way that this kind of plays out is the ban's different because Anubis is out the pool, so Mouz didn't have to ban Anubis. They were able to ban DusT too, so that took one of Vitality's biggest strengths off the table. I think that certainly helped. I think it helped that Mouz were able to capitalize on Mirage, which Mirage was the one that they went back and forth on in their history against each other. But I think Vitality had won it the last 2 times they put against each other on it. So to flip the script on that with the dominant CT side was nice. And then, yeah, Vitality kind of changed their pickup. They're used to being able to pick DusT 2 against Mousesports. They couldn't because they got banned first. They also have, in the past, used Inferno to great effect against Mouz. But they decided to try to pivot the train, and it just backfired. And again, I can't necessarily say that it backfired so much on like overall performance, because again, I think they did enough on the T side. It's just that one anti-eco stops them from having a 6 to 7 round T side half, which would have put them even further ahead, gave them a lot more cushion to use in the second half defensively. And then, yeah, losing a 2v5 against Eagles, that hurt. Because not only did they lose that round, but then that set their economy back for 2 additional rounds. And so those really did have massive impact. Like, I can't really say that Vitality shouldn't have picked Train. I think they just made a couple of errors and anti-ecos that really came out to haunt them. But also, I mean, I feel like this is one of the first times we have seen Mouz perform this well with all their individual players. I mean, we know that Mouz has a huge amount of talent. We know that the skill dispersal on this team is quite vast. We know that when guys like Xerxes and Torzy are in form with their play styles and the roles that they play on this team, they can have massive impact and really drive this team forward. You know, you saw Jimmy have a big series. I know he's had some struggles this year, so to see him do well. I mean, Spinks wasn't even necessarily called upon as much. You know, you had kind of one of the more off series. I mean, usually he's like in the top 2 of this team. I think he's overall been their best player since he's been on the roster when you kind of look at an in-and-out basis what he does, right? I think Xerxes can have more impact when he's on form because of his entry roles. I do think Torzy as an opper, who's more on the more aggressive end of the spectrum of opping and can do some rifling as well, I think he can have crazy impact as well. But all in all, they just all fired off. They just all played really well, and this is something they just did not have in previous series against Vitality. Meanwhile, Vitality massively underperformed in this one. Let's be quite frank. I mean, only Rops really showed up overall for the series. Zebu was totally off base. Flames was totally off base. I think he got, 1 kill on Train, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah, 1 in 18. I mean, this is just ludicrous to see that level of failure. And then, yeah, to have Zywoo be that off is just also kind of unreal. And then when you look at Mirage, yeah, I mean, this is just pitiful from Zebu. This is just no way that he should be performing that badly. So it is kind of a mix and mash, but for Esports, it's massive. Yes, they did get dominated in the grand finals, but for them to finally break through and beat Vitality, that's a big one for them. That's something they can hold on to going into the next tournaments the rest of this season, knowing that, hey, we can beat this team. And yes, you know, they did drop the ball in the grand final, but I think that this is at least shows that they're still improving and evolving with this 5. They elected not to make a roster change despite losing to Vitality so many times in the first season of 2025. Some people thought maybe they could have considered a roster move to see if they could finally break through and beat Vitality. Maybe they needed a true in-game leader. Maybe they needed to do something else to kind of rile the team back up after just coming second over and over and over and over again. And ironically enough, they do come second again, but in a much different way because they did finally get one over on Vitality. So this is overall pretty good news for Mousesports despite failing in the grand final. Now, when you look at the flip side of this, for Vitality, it is the streak over, right? I mean, this is a team that won 7 titles in a row, including a major. They had won at 37 best of 3 or best of 5s in a row. They had obviously an incredible overall win rate. I mean, 82 wins and 20 losses when it came to their maps. That's just incredible stuff. I mean, you look at their map pool, that's incredible stuff as well. 20-3 on Inferno. They were undefeated for quite some time on this map before finally falling prey at the major, but still did ultimately go 20-3 on Inferno this year. Very good record on Mirage. Bonkers records on Nuke and DusT 2. Bonkers on Train typically, even though it did fail them in the grand final. They were an Anubis team. It's gone now, but they proved that they can play Overpass already. They only had to play it once, but they look really good in that game. So an incredible map pool. And then, yeah, just the overall performance of their players this year has been fantastic. They really have had it all. And I've done some more detailed videos about Vitality. I think the best one you can go watch if you want a more detailed analysis from me on Vitality is when I did a video about the Vitality era just before this season started, you know, kind of right after the blast off. So maybe you should go check that out. But yeah, it finally ended. But here's the thing. It's not like the Vitality era is over because they lost one best of 3 the Mousesports and had one disappointment, I guess you could say. Top 4 finish at Cologne after winning 7 in a row. No era in CS's history has been a team just winning everything, right? When you go back and you look at the Astralis era that they were able to put together from like 2018 through 2019, there were some losses included in that. They weren't winning everything. In fact, they didn't really get dominant in that era until like the second half of 2018. You go look at the Fnatic era. They didn't win at all. They just were super dominant. And Vitality still are in a position to be super dominant for some time now. I mean, they clean up a couple of mistakes on Train. They could have won that map and forced a third. No doubt about it. And then who knows what would have happened from that point forward. So, I mean, Vitality already had their era from just how dominant their first season was at the first half of 2025. And it's only up to them now how much further this goes, how much longer it lasts, and what legacy they truly do leave behind. Because if they fight right back and win a Blast Open London, or they come back and they win another big tournament, or they go and they win the next major, right? They are going to extend the era even further at that point, no matter if they take, a finals loss here or a semifinals loss there. Like if they keep placing top 4 and no other team rises up to dominate, and Vitality remains a consistent contender, and they do put a couple of more titles on the board throughout the rest of this year, the era will continue, right? So I think some people might be rushing a little bit to say that the era is over. The streak is over, but the era is not over, right? They still control their fate as far as that goes going forward. Still a good finish for Vitality, still an impressive run. I mean, the fact that they went this long without losing is ludicrous. Like, I don't think people understand how crazy it is that they won that many series in a row, considering how competitive the scene is right now. I mean, Mouz were a well-built team. Falcons had their moments where they looked strong, right? I mean, Spirit do have the crazy danger of donk alone that allows them to do well. MongolZ were making a rise up the board. There are some other strong teams out there as well. So to see the field this competitive and to see what they were able to do, no one else is going to match this, in my opinion, going forward. I don't think we'll ever see another streak like this, if I'm being 100% honest. I really don't. So, still job well done to Vitality for what they've accomplished so far, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more. Now to move on to another story, you have to admit this was a pretty nice bounce-back event for NaVi. I mean, they had been kind of hanging around the top 8 in the world despite some of their struggles this year, but they were certainly in dire need of a change. They were, again, the team of 2024. Many people's eyes, they had a chance to have the first era of CS2 before Vitality if they could have won the Shanghai Major. They obviously, disappointingly, didn't even make the playoffs of that major, getting knocked out by Heroic. And then they came to this year, in the first couple of events, it seemed like they might be able to get back to their old selves, but eventually it just didn't work out. JL was struggling to have the same impact that he had last year. Bit was struggling to have the same impact he had last year. Ema also wasn't doing as well as we know he is capable of. Really, on all fronts, his team was just not anything like the NaVi before. And so they do make a change. They made one change. JL obviously decides to go the content creator route for a while. They bring in MongolZ from their academy team, and they were able to do all right at this event, right? I mean, they were able to make it all the way to the semifinals and lost to the eventual champions in Spirit in a series where they at least were able to get one map, and Mirage was semi-close. I mean, the score line is close, but I do think Spirit dominated the second half of that game. I don't think NaVi really had a chance to win that one. But when you look at the rest of it, I mean, they were able to take down FaZe, which I know FaZe is having their own struggles, fair enough. Had a close series against Mousesports, 10-13 score lines. Then they beat NIP, which were looking pretty dangerous, Kaspersky, in all honesty, and a team that also looked like they had some potential when we saw them at Astana. Then they dominate FaZe the second time around, and then they beat MongolZ. I mean, this is a big moment for them because MongolZ are a top 5 team in the world. They were the runners-up at the Blast Austin Major. At that major, it looked like they had finally broken through their, stage woes, I guess you could call it. Now that calls it back into question based on how they performed on this one, to be honest, because unfortunately for MongolZ, but fortunately for NaVi, it seems like once again we saw the Senzu we had seen struggle in the past in this one, right? And so that really does hurt. But I think we did see a resurgence from Bit throughout the course of this tournament, particularly in the series. He was massive. Even though he wasn't massive in this series, I thought Ema played pretty well throughout the entire tournament. Wonderful doing his job. And then MongolZ, I think the jury's still out on this one. I don't think he had the crazy breakthrough performance that kyousuke had for Falcons, for example, in the list of players that were kind of rookies coming into this like first real big test after all the roster changes of the, off-season break. But he had his moments where he looked really good. Right? I think in particular for him, it was the CT side of Inferno that they made the comeback on against MongolZ, where MongolZ really did shine as that B-bomb site defender in particular. I think that was like really where he showed his stuff. And then they obviously dominated the second map on the CT side of Ancient, where they really didn't have to do much outside of that. So yeah, I really do think that MongolZ overall had some struggles as an entryman on T side, because essentially MongolZ has kind of taken JL's roles on some maps, but then he's also kind of seen Ema move to some other positions, and he's kind of taken some of Ema spots in some situations as well. So it's been kind of a mix. He hasn't been a true one-for-one for JL on every single spot on the map. Hell, on Ancient, they did some like really big changes where they actually had Ema playing outside A. They moved Bit from A to B where JL used to play, and then they had MongolZ playing middle. So that's just one example of how NaVi's kind of still tinkering with their T sides a bit, and it's not quite a one-for-one swap. But yeah, I think, MongolZ is still kind of figuring out, I think, the entry side and the space-taking side of how he plays T-sides on this team. But he did have some good T-sides at times throughout this tournament. And defensively, he had a phenomenal performance against MongolZ in this series in particular that really kind of put his name on the map, so to speak, after, having some rougher times in some of the earlier games. And I mean, his T-side opening wasn't that bad overall, 27%, 44% success. That's not too bad. I feel like most entry fraggers that are considered really good are in like the high 40% range. Maybe they even get close to 50 or get just to 50. The fact that someone like, Donk's able to get towards 60% is ludicrous. Like, that is such an anomaly, an outlier. Like, even last year when like Xantares and Insani and Elige were kind of at the peak of their powers, they were like right at 50%, 52% maybe. So this overall wasn't terrible for his active T-side role. And this is really kind of another sign for NaVi, where in the past, everyone kind of was in that like low 20% range except for Wonderful. Like, anyone could find an opening. Like, yeah, Ema was kind of their main entry, and Alexi B as an IGL obviously would be in some entry positions on certain maps. But when you had like Bit and JL kind of like playing a mix of extremity roles and then in some maps more active roles, it was really an opening could come from anywhere on the map. We really haven't seen NaVi put a player in this type of position where they're taking that high of an opening attempt rate. I think you still did kind of see Bit and Ema and Alexi B all kind of in that 20% range, but he really did step up and become like more of a prime entry target, which is really the first time we've seen NaVi do this in quite some time, and he didn't do too bad. Again, I think for MongolZ, this is something to build off of, and overall, I think this was a bounce back for NaVi to make a semifinal. This is their first semifinal they made since Katowice. That's a long time ago. So this is a step in the right direction considering how much they struggled this year. They made this one move. We thought maybe they could make two moves. I still think maybe they might have to make another move at some point, but for now, this was a step in the right direction. Then we gotta talk about Furia, because this squad just continues to impress. I mean, I'm just leaving it on the screen because when you saw this roster on paper first form, I'm sure everyone expected pretty much nothing from this team. I mean, you would have had to have been the most diehard of diehard Furia fans to truly believe that this team looked like they were going to contend for trophies, right? I mean, you got Maladoy and Opper coming out of complete obscurity. No one was really talking about this guy. I mean, he had a little bit of talk about him and Grix and a couple other guys as like potential tier 2, tier 3 Oppers that could make a step up to a top level team, but there was really no true knowing if they actually could perform at this level. And then Yakindar was obviously a guy who had massive struggles for quite an extended period of time, his last stint with Liquid for a while there, right? And so you were really not expecting much from this team, let's be frank. But look at what this team's been able to do. Their first event, they actually were able to come fourth at Astana. And yeah, the field there wasn't that strong in comparison to some of the top tier 1 events, sure. But still, like based on where they were and what the roster looked like on paper, it was still pretty good. Yeah, Blast was a bump in the, or excuse me, yeah, Dallas was a bump in the road. But then they were able to make the playoffs at the Blast Austin Major. And after a tough one at Fissure, they 5th, 6th place this at Cologne. And you look at the matches they played at Cologne, they get to the play-in very quickly against FlyQuest and Astralis. They lose to the new look G2. Then they win against Astralis again. They beat Falcons, who have the firepower of a kyousuke who was in form at this event. And then they have Nico and Munisi, who are historically two of the best players in the world. right? You would easily put them in or near your top 5 more often than not. And yes, Falcons flopped, let's be frank, but the fact that they were able to do this and then get revenge against G2 and then take a map off of Mouz, and look, they pushed Mouz to the limits in this game. It very easily could have been Furia going to the semifinals against Vitality instead of Mouz. Like, they really put this one close. I mean, when you look how it played out, they could have won this train in overtime, very possibly. They did win Mirage, and then on Inferno, they really should have won this. They allowed Mouse Sports to make a big comeback in the second half to win it. So, really almost got it done. And, I mean, MongolZ is fucking legit. He is legit, bro. He is it. Like, he is a contender for Rookie of the Year. I think kyousuke has, obviously, the ability to overshadow him, and there are some other guys out there like PR, Tanier, and a few other names that certainly could contend for that kind of title, but MongolZ has got to be a front runner. I mean, this guy is legit super aggressive opper and has been performing consistently against top-level opposition at all these events that this team has played at. Has he had a couple of misses? Sure. But overall, what this guy has been able to do is crazy. Meanwhile, kyousuke remains a star-level player on this team, being able to kind of play, you know, some pack positions, but also some active extremity positions, more of a trade fragger. Can go for some openings, but Yekindar really is the primary entry of this team. Yuri, been playing pretty solid, even though he's had to sometimes take like some of Skull's old roles and kind of pivot the way that he plays the game. Still an effective trade fragger, still effective in his anchor position on the CT side. They actually moved him to a more active role on Banana on T side Inferno, and he actually is doing pretty well with that with kyousuke. So he is still finding his way on this team and being successful as well. And then, yeah, Yekindar. Yekindar has been fantastic. I think what particularly has made him really strong is that on the CT side, he has been really, really good. But when you look at his T-side opening, it's pretty solid. Like, he's going for 33% opening attempts, has a 45% success rate. That's pretty damn good, especially when you compare it to where he was at on Liquid. You know, like, towards the end of his Liquid days, this guy was like below 40% success rate on T-side openings. Like, he was way down there. And now he's actually showing that he can be a threat in some of his T-side entry roles. Ash actually did a very good video on Yekindar you should probably go check out. I'll put it in the description below, where he kind of walked through some of Yekindar's decision-making and pathing on his T-side entries, and the fact that even on maps like DusT 2, where he's playing an extremity role, like at Long A, he still gets shuffled over into executes eventually. Same thing could be said on Inferno. He was actually sometimes playing apartments. Like, him and Fallen were kind of playing apartments, which was definitely a new look for them, because Yekindar usually would kind of play middle, like Boiler, and he still can be very active on middle T-side Inferno, and then you could still pull him over when you want to go for a B execute. But yeah, he's kind of playing a mix of like default solo positions, but then being the primary entry still on this team does go for plays. And yeah, he's entering pretty well overall. Defensively, he's looked really good in his CT spots. They've even moved him to like A-Con on Mirage, and he's done well with that. And I mean, yeah, just overall, I've been impressed with Yekindar having this resurgence, with kyousuke continuing to be a star, with MongolZ proving that he's the truth. Fallen also fragging at a pretty high level for a rifling IGL. He's had impact in some of the games that he has played, that is for sure. His overall numbers might not leap off the page, but they're pretty good for an IGL standard, and he has had some impactful matches. So this team has way over-delivered on what they looked like they were going to be able to do when you look at the roster on paper, and I am very, very curious to see how this team continues to function, because this is kind of a whimsical lineup in some ways, but it's actually delivered on paper in some pretty big tournaments. Yeah, there's been a couple of misses here and there too. It's not all been, you know, rainbows and sunshine. They've had a couple of misses, but man, you have to be pretty impressed with Furia overall. And so now we do have to talk about MongolZ, which is kind of a mixed bag, because at this event, they placed 5th, which on paper isn't that bad. The fashion in which they got knocked out of this tournament calls some things into question, because MongolZ was a team that really did see a series of breakthroughs throughout the last year or so. And really the first big breakthrough for them was the fact that they made the playoffs of the Perfect World Shanghai Major. They were the first team from East Asia to do so. I know a lot of people say they were the first team from Asia to make a major playoff, but that's technically not true, because Kazakhstan is technically a part of Central Asia, and obviously we've had Kazakhstani players win a major with Gambit, and then some of the others have done well at other majors as well. Obviously Kickert being one of them. He's won a major, and he's from Kazakhstan. But still, MongolZ being able to make that major playoff was still very historical, because It's the first time we had seen a team from East Asia do so. And so you had many teams from China try to do it, whether it was Tyloo or Flash Gaming or Vici Gaming, Invictus. The list goes on of Chinese teams that were coming to international events and would make it to majors, but wouldn't get very far. And honestly, outside of Tyloo doing well at like this one DreamHack Masters land in like 2016, where they were able to beat the fallen Brazilian team. I can't remember if they were Luminosity or SK at that time, but they beat them in a best of 3. Now it was like this crazy upset. Outside of that and maybe a couple of other instances here and there wasn't a whole lot going on for these teams. Even older versions of MongolZ and such weren't really getting the job done. So for this MongolZ to come in and make a major playoff was huge. And then they came to this year, they get a top 4 finish at Katowice. They get a top 4 finish at EPL. They get a top 4 finish at Melbourne and Dallas. And so now all of a sudden they were putting themselves in a top 5 team category consistently, where they were now really becoming a threat, really becoming a contender in a top team. Yes, they weren't really able to get themselves into title position, right? Even their run to the finals at the Blast Austin Major, they had some lighter opponents kind of along the way, if we're 100% honest. But I think the big breakthrough for them was that they did make a major final, and they were able to, actually show some presence on stage. And yes, they did so against weaker opposition in FaZe and Pain, but FaZe coming into the playoffs were playing pretty well. Simple was popping off, and they were looking like a much better version of themselves than before. And it wasn't really even about the opponent they were up against. It was just like a lot of these players would fall off on stage. Now, I've talked about this in previous content, where I've talked about MongolZ, so you can go check that out if you want to. But to now see them come into this one, and I'm going to let the Vitality one go, but whenever they go up against NaVi on stage, and I'm seeing, again, some of these guys struggle to really have impact, it calls into question that storyline again. Because, look, I do think MongolZ are still a top 5 team in the world. I think they will maintain that position. I think Blitz is still a great fragging IGL. They have a fun, explosive play style. I do think that Sinzu can be an aggressive rifling star. I think 910 is one of the best operas we've ever seen come out of Asia. But and Mizzino and Techno are good role players. I think sometimes they get a little bit overshadowed or maybe a little bit underrated. But it is now a question mark once again that we're going to have to revisit about this whole stage thing. Because I think people had hoped that they had shed those demons off when they made that run at the Blast Austin Major and they finally had some big stage matches go their way and players show up in them. But now that they had that bad of a fall to NaVi, that storyline will now come back up. Right? It's the same storyline that Mouz were wrestling with in 2024 as the Studio Merchants. And they eventually shed that off because they did have some deep runs towards the end of 2024. And obviously in 2025, they were number 2 team in the world. So they've definitely put that to bed. But MongolZ now will have to wrestle that demon once again as we continue on this season. And we'll just have to kind of keep an eye on it. I still think they're a great team. I still think they're a fun team to watch. I think they still have some great players. I think they still are making history for their region. But we do have to keep an eye on their stage matches going forward to see if they truly can consistently shake that off and become a real contender going forward. And for one of the last big stories we'll talk about before we just kind of finish off some odds and ends is the flop of Falcons. Because look, they were a team that if we look at their history this year, they were putting themselves in position to be a top team in the world. I mean, they had 3 events in a row where they placed in the top 4, including 2 finals appearances where they were looking deadly. And their last event with Dexter, they had won the PGL Bucharest event as well. So this team looked to be on the right track, but then they flopped the major hard. It was embarrassing. Let's be 100% honest. And so that meant all eyes were on them coming into Cologne because they also brought in another star player. Or at least a potential star. And that was Kyousuke, who was obviously coming from Spirit Academy. And he was meant to be another big piece of firepower for this team. And they started off fine against Gamer Legion. But then they completely looked not even close to competitive, really, against MongolZ. And then while they did win the opening map against Furia, they got bounced on the final map of the series, thus after losing a close game on Mirage. And I'm sorry, when you're up against Furia, even though I did just get finished praising this team, for being a team that has performed way higher than expectations. When you look at these lineups on paper, there's no way that people like Nico should be performing this badly against these players. And the same really could be said for MongolZ as well, even though his rating was pretty good overall. And this one, if you actually look at his tournament overall, he played really poorly against MongolZ in particular. So that is a little bit damning, for him and Nico to perform this badly at this tournament. Now, with that said, it's not entirely all doom and gloom from Falcons, even though I think people will spin it that way, and rightly so, because I did like the theory behind kind of what they were doing at kyousuke, because essentially what they were doing on most T sides were they were basically putting kyousuke in more active positions like he's supposed to be, as like an entry guy or second guy in that type of level of player. Or maybe Tessus might do some entering. Obviously, Kixon can do a little bit as an IGL, obviously. But they were really trying to make him that front-runner guy, which is what he's supposed to be. And this has kind of moved Nico back into more of an extremity role. Like, the best example I can think of is like Mirage Chisao, where he was playing A, which he has played in the past, obviously. But he was more of a pack player in more recent years and more of an active force. And so he was, and I think DusT 2 would be like another example where there were times where I was seeing Nico kind of play B tunnels because kyousuke was playing like lower tunnels into middle and things of that nature to be in that more active role. But it was a little bit of a mix, right? Because kyousuke was playing some positions that maybe you wouldn't expect an aggressive star rifle to play, like ramp room on Nuke CT side, which was interesting to see him playing that role while Nico maintained his position out in the yard. So all in all, I felt like they were actually finding a pretty good balance as far as like the roles were going. I think kyousuke did perform very well individually. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, at this event, he was the second player in rating behind donk. Yes, he played half as many maps, so you do have to take that into consideration. But he did as well as you could have hoped for at this event. Great rating, great ADR, great KPR. As far as his T-side opening, was fantastic. 27% opening attempts, 60% success rate, right below donk by like 1%. So, I mean, and he was doing this against good teams. Like, he was doing this against MongolZ, who are a top 5 team in the world, Gamer Legion, which, fringe top 10 team in the world, in my opinion. Definitely, they had some big finishes leading up to the Blast Austin Major. They obviously weren't at the Major, but they had a couple of big finishes at some big tournaments just before the Major. And yes, they did just make a roster change with kyousuke, and he's been kind of iffy, honestly, but still a decent team. And then, yeah, Furia has been a top 10 team in their own right and have done some impressive things. We've already kind of gone through that. So the fact that he was consistently performing at a high level was really, really good. And while he was certainly playing like star active positions on maps like DusT 2 and Mirage in particular, which they played a lot of, it was interesting seeing him play like ramp room on Nuke, for instance, play like a CT role that maybe isn't as engaging, so to speak. They were finding a good balance of how to implement him, how to still keep Nico involved and all that. It's just Nico wasn't performing that well overall in this tournament. Mouz had an off series against MongolZ, and the team overall did not look what you would want to see. But this is a, great news for kyousuke. And now to finish this off with some kind of quick odds and ends. I mean, still too soon to call for G2 with like Madison, Sun Pius, and Saw as a coach. I'm going to kind of leave that one alone. They had some okay moments. They had some not so great moments, but I think a top 8 finish is not a bad starting place for this new team. I do think some of their players did not perform nearly as well as you would want them to, but I did see in some cases things go well. Like I think Hunter in an IGL role actually fragged pretty well, and he's kind of learning the ropes of IGLing. Mattis did okay. Malbs looked a little bit more himself. So there were some things that looked okay, but there were still clearly some issues that need to be resolved. FaZe is still FaZe. I'm not even going to get into that. 3D Max is in the same position they've fucking always been. It feels like they're always in that 9th to 14th place finish at every single tournament that they play. And at this point, until they get some more firepower, they will never get past this, in my opinion. I think they are pretty much maxed out as far as what pieces they have available to them. Like, I just don't see them really doing much better than this. Like, maybe they'll have the occasional top 8 finish with the right bracket and they had the right overperformance or whatever. But yeah, Nip finishing 9th to 12th. Obviously the overall result's not going to be great, but I liked what I saw on paper. I thought Percy actually played really well. I mean, after kyousuke, he was one of the more impressive rookie performances at this tournament. Like, when I'm looking at the overall performances at this tournament, yes, kyousuke was the best, newcomer performance, but I thought Percy was basically number 2. I think MongolZ was probably kind of neck and neck with him. MongolZ went deeper in the tournament and had some really big moments in some of those, like that CT side Inferno, for example, that we talked about. Sure. But obviously, Zwei underperformed, didn't look that good. Nilo and Grix were meh. kyousuke was kind of meh. So, in all honesty, I thought Kaspersky actually performed really well. He was playing a lot of active roles and going for a lot of openings. He was like kind of the other big aggressor on this team besides E-Jerks and then Wrinkle being in a very aggressive opper. But then he also played like outside B solo, T-side default Mirage, or default. But then he also played like solo outside B on T-side Overpass, which is more an extremity role. But he was used in a more active way in that position. So he did show a good range of role capability, and overall performance actually was pretty good, I thought. So all in all, thumbs up for that one. And then for the rest of it, I mean, Aurora's using the stand-in, and they've been struggling for a while anyway. So yeah, they need to figure some shit out. They need to figure out their roster, first of all, like getting Xantares back embedded, because they took a long break. That didn't work. You know, it's been kind of iffy over there. They were a team that wasn't that far removed from competing with Mongols for like 5th in the world. So to see them continue to slide downwards is really damning for that team. And they obviously have a limited talent, pool that they can play with because they are a fully Turkish team. But yeah, I'm not sure what the answer for Aurora is going forward. They need to define themselves. I mean, it's a tough one, right? And then for the rest of it, I mean, it was just really damning. I mean, the Liquid continues to just be a fucking giant mess. This new look, Heroic, not looking that impressive at all. They lost so much when they lost Saul and they lost Sun Pius. And then they decided to bench X-Flowers, one of their better players, which I'm not sure why the heck that is. They're trying to embed, Nilo into the team. They're trying to embed Grix into the team. New coaching staff. It just isn't really firing right now, let's be honest. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Pain, very disappointing to see how well they did it at the major and then not be able to follow that up. Now that they finally have their roster in order and have had time to stabilize and practice with S5, to see them finish this low is damning. VP, fucking Overwatch fart noise. I mean, like, I saw this coming. I talked about it whenever I was going through roster moves. They are just still pitiful. Tyloo sucks because they were coming off that really good run at Fissure Playground, and you were hoping they could use that to build off of, but they were unable to do so. And then the rest is just kind of the rest, right? The rest is kind of a wash. And yeah, that's that. And so that is going to do it for this video. Again, something a little bit different, a little bit more kind of surface level, broad strokes, just kind of talking about some of the biggest stories coming out of Cologne. Let me know what you thought of this video. Is this something you'd like to see more of in the future? Let me know if there's any other things you'd like to see me do. I'm still kind of experimenting with the type of content I can do on this channel. So yeah, I'm always open to suggestions. Again, I was thinking about doing a video just breaking down that best of 3 between Mouz and Vitality and how Mouz were able to actually beat Vitality and end the streak and, in the repeated losses they were taking against that team and finally turn the tide. So if that's something you might be interested, leave a comment down below. I can get that video cranked out pretty soon. And other than that, though, if you want to support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, anything you'd like to below. That really always helps. And I'll see you on the next one.